The thoughts and opinions of Skylar Sylvie expressed on this show do not necessarily reflect those of the Grimm Times podcast or Jeff Jarman. Thank you and enjoy the show. All right, hello and welcome to the Grimm Times podcast. This is episode number 8. I'm your host, Jeff Jarman, along with Skylar Sylvie.
Whatever.
And we are going to be talking about Star Trek versus Star Wars today on the podcast.
Actually, preferably, I would say Star Wars versus Star Trek. That sounds better.
Oh, it gets first billing, yeah. Well,
yeah, first, yeah.
Star Trek is actually a much better show, so I think it was correct in being first billed. But, you know, it's subjective.
Oh, you're incorrect, so in your thought.
Oh, okay. Well, let's start off with, I would give a brief overview of both series, but let's face it, everybody knows already both series.
And if they don't, then they should just go away.
Yeah, they might want to skip this podcast or listen and go watch the shows themselves. So,
or learn how to read the title that's going to be on this video.
Yeah. Well, I think to start with, I would just like to say that Star Trek, it's a much more grown-up show. It's much more sophisticated, in my opinion.
Right.
Yeah, I can hear you sigh already. But basically, I think my first best argument is Star Trek is not owned by Disney.
Yeah, now.
Yeah.
For the moment.
But
just wait
until they take over the world. Yeah. But
yeah,
it's always been a more mature subject matter as far as you've got your captain who controls the ship, and you go on diplomatic missions, and you deal with different alien cultures, and you have to learn about them, and how they can affect human life and all this kind of stuff, and you have to just explore space. Pretty much, it's the ultimate dream for a lot of people is explore the universe, see what's out there, go on adventures, things like this. Whereas,
yeah, the only good thing that was ever in was Mass Effect.
What do you mean? Oh, as far as like the Star Trek type of scenario?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it. The only thing that was ever good was Mass Effect. So, whatever.
Well, really, that should make you like Star Trek in itself, is that having Mass Effect be so similar to that, where, you have your ship and your captain, you go on missions, and you take the ground crew out, and you explore the planet and all this stuff. Whereas Star Wars has a much more lighthearted type of feel to it, like you've got all these different characters, and you got you do in Star Trek as well, don't get me wrong, and there's funny parts, but with Star Wars you've got really, some characters really goofy, some of them are the serious Jedi, and frankly, Star Trek I'm sure has inconsistency, but I didn't like the inconsistency with Yoda in Star Wars in particular.
Yeah, that's because you didn't understand what the point was with that.
Was there a point?
Yes. Master Yoda is actually a Jedi Master, and he was trying to test Luke as to the extent of his patience. That's why he started all crazy and everything, because Luke too was was impatient with that shit. He was in a hurry. He wanted to hurry up and learn to be a Jedi and hurry up and do everything, and that's the path to the dark side. And besides, the good thing about Star Wars, which you should like about it, it has a much more clear perspective on good and evil.
Well, yeah, but in reality, do we have that clear of a perspective? I don't think we do.
Well, it wasn't about reality. It's a fucking sci-fi.
Well, that's true. Star Trek is more of a reality. It's a reality based on the future.
Yes.
How diplomats are going to pursue, alien life headed into the future.
Right.
Star Wars is a much more free roaming sci-fi adventure.
You know what? I'm gonna pull a cheap ass move. Star Wars has fucking lightsabers. Okay. I'm sorry, but Captain Baldy, whatever the hell his name is,
Jean-Luc Picard.
Yeah, retard. That guy. Him versus freaking, I don't know, Darth Vader. No match. You know why? Lightsaber.
Well, plus Vader has mystical powers using the Force and all this kind of stuff too.
Right. Oh, let's not forget a fucking Death Star.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Star Wars is just based off of a much more lighthearted fantasy reality, and where people can, move things with their mind and all this stuff. So, I mean, really, a Jedi almost might just be a glorified psychic.
No, he's not. He's a glorified Buddhist monk.
Yeah, well, that too. But
Yeah.
it really depends on your taste, I guess. I mean, because I prefer the more realistic view on things. Um, Star Wars just had so many different facets to it, and a few inconsistencies that I didn't like. Like even if Yoda was trying to be the guy who tests Luke's patience and all that kind of stuff, I mean he was like that for a long time, and it was a huge change of pace. Because in
Well,
like
he was only in there for only doing that for maybe 5 minutes, and
before
then
he
he actually
died.
specifically says the line, "I cannot train him. He has no patience."
Well, maybe that would be the good reason for it, I guess. I mean, it was just such a stark contrast between Yoda in the CG Yoda turning into the puppet Yoda, but with the 3D or a CG movie from the third movie, the Episode 3 more specifically, he was so serious and such a focused little Jedi creature, whatever he
Well,
is.
how about I put it this way? You want to talk about reality situations? If you took yourself and put yourself in a hermit situation for long periods of time, and you finally saw some person that you can fuck with the patience of that you haven't seen for like fucking 25 years, would you do it?
I don't know if he's a Jedi. He's supposed to have a mind that is pretty much impenetrable, and
But see, he was fucking with his head to test, his patience. They weren't in the same situation that they were in 25 years prior. He didn't have the ability to just kind of be there and do all that shit. He wasn't even Luke wasn't even trained in the same way. If you took Luke Skywalker and put him up against any of the Jedi of the day, he would lose because in the sense that he wasn't. They weren't just in terms of sword technique because of how he was being trained. He wasn't trained on like the same level that other Jedi were being trained because they didn't have enough of that environment around them to do that. So it's basically like one of those deals where after all the Jedi for the most part were killed, a lot of the knowledge died with it, and the only remaining thing that was left was the only knowledge remaining was in old Obi-Wan Kenobi and a 900-year-old midget green guy. That was it.
well, what about Darth Vader?
Why the fuck would Vader treat any or train anybody as being a Jedi? He'd train him as being a Sith.
Well, not train them as being a Jedi, but he should know the old practice of being the Jedi.
It wasn't that he could have shown that, but you see, all of his limbs were removed and they were replaced with body parts or with not body parts, raised with mechanics, and also part of the rest of his body, his lungs, was replaced with artificial lungs and shit like that because he was basically half robot. So, but he didn't have as much movability, and he had to live in this suit in order to survive. So it wasn't like one of these deals where he could move in the same way as he did in the past because he was limited to that. So he relied more on his power in the end than he did on his movability. So he became more slow and methodical,
So
which is
basically,
what made him a badass bad guy.
well, if Luke wasn't trained classically as the typical Jedi would be, and he couldn't stand up to them, how was he able to go toe to toe with Darth Vader for so long?
Actually, if you pay attention to the storyline really closely, he lost against Vader the first time he went up against him. He wasn't strong enough, and whatever. And then the last time, the only reason he won, if you pay really close attention, there was a father and son. That was the whole point of the story. Vader had no desire to kill his son. He may have acted like it, but in the end, he didn't want to, and actually saved him. Which is like the whole reason why I like Star Wars so much. It's a father and son story, okay, and it has a really good point to it. And Vader, if you look in the end of Star Wars Episode 6, there was many, many opportunities where Vader could have just chopped him in half. Because
Well,
Luke got pissed off, got carried away, which technically you could say that he, for a moment, went to the dark side in order to defeat Vader. He used anger. And in the end, realized he was getting pissed off and stopped and threw his lightsaber away and said he'd rather die than turn to the dark side
Yeah.
and kill his father.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, either way, I think these new Star Wars movies, they've announced they're going to make three of them, correct?
Yes, 7, 8, and 9.
Yeah, they're still probably going to draw more money than any of the Star Trek movies did for sure. Star Wars has a much wider fan base.
Well, the reason it has a much wider fan base is for several reasons. Consistency, number one. I don't mean consistency with storyline. I mean characters. With Star Trek, you have way too many freaking arguments on who is the best fucking captain. Okay, and I'm sorry, anything against Captain Retard or whatever his name is, Pickard or whatever, was absolutely, even that was kind of stupid. But anything beyond that was even stupider. Okay, it was just added compiled to the stupidity. Okay, and they have too many debates on all of that. Star Wars was always consistent in all of their characters. None of the characters ever changed out. Even the guy who played in freaking the original the first episodes 1, 2, and 3 as Darth Sidious, who later became the Emperor, was the same guy who played the Emperor in Episode 6.
Yeah, but he's the only one who was actually in all the movies, right?
No, Frank Oz was the original puppeteer of Yoda. He was the same one. All those robots played by the same characters. And actually, I'm wrong. The only guy who wasn't in it was the original guy in the suit of Darth Vader.
They didn't use puppets in
Because
the first three movies, though, did they? How was Frank Oz doing anything?
yeah, Frank Oz was the puppeteer that did in Yoda originally.
Yeah, what? So he did the
And
voice too?
he did the voice too.
Oh,
Yeah.
so that's what you're saying. Because I was gonna say they didn't use puppets in the first three movies.
Yes, they did. In
Well, not
episode
for
one, they
not
did
for
use a
Yoda.
puppet.
Did they for Yoda?
Yep, in episode one.
Huh.
And episode 2 and 3 was the only time he was ever CG. But I think in 2, if I remember correctly, they did have a couple close-ups where it was a puppet. I think I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure they did. Episode 3, he was completely CG in episode 3. And I'm sorry, that duel between him and Sidious was fucking awesome and epic as shit. I don't care what anybody says.
Well, they were able to
So
do that because he was CG. That's the only reason.
right, but when you get to see Yoda actually fight a little midget fight, that was like massive epicness. And sword play beats guns
Yeah,
every time.
yeah.
I don't care what anybody says. And on top of that, it being a lightsaber. Okay, and you know what? I'm not even gonna say it's a lightsaber. It's a fucking lightsaber. Okay, it is fucking awesome. In fact, if they could create lightsabers today, you know how useful it could be just as a tool. Like you want to cut down trees, just walk along the forest and go, you know.
That would also be very bad though if normal people got a hold of that thing.
Oh yeah, imagine as we talked about in the last 2 episodes, if gang members got a hold of
Oh
lightsabers, what
yeah,
would happen?
yeah. That'd be pretty bad.
On the bright side, there'd be no blood.
Yeah, everything would be burned off and cauterized instantly.
Yeah. Which, by the way, that is one pet peeve I have about Star Wars in Episode 4, where the guy gets his arm chopped off by a lightsaber and there's blood on the floor.
Yeah.
If there was any one thing I have a pet peeve about Star Wars with, it would be that. So that, and I will honestly say, Episode 2, I didn't like. I liked Episode 1. Okay, and you fucking people can go, or whoever, not you specifically, but any of these fucking people can go and they can dog that annoying guy that said me thanks all the time and stuff like that. I can't remember his name.
Jar Jar Binks?
Jar Jar Binks. Yes, I liked that character myself. It was like one of my favorite characters in that whole movie. It was hilarious. I don't know why it pissed off people so much, but I liked it.
Because they didn't think Star Wars was serious enough anymore.
Well, you see, what people don't think about is it was all about Anakin. There's a whole series about him and him bringing balance to the Force by turning to the dark side and being redeemed. It was the only way it would happen. It was the prophecy. Okay, so the overall point is in Episode 1 he was a little kid. Okay, so it's going to be a little bit more childish. Episode 2, he was a teenager and was trying to fall in love, and we all know how fucked up and complicated and strange that is. Okay, it's kind of difficult to explain that teenage love thing. It's almost like a kind of a creepy topic to an extent. Not really creepy, just strange.
Awkward.
So it had, huh?
Awkward.
Awkward. There you go. That's what I'm looking for. And then that was what episode two was. Episode two was actually awkward. Okay. And then three was, was him as an adult and him turning to the dark side. And each mood of each one of those movies followed Anakin with age. And that was one thing that I noticed, and I really think was the intention by George Lucas. It's just that nobody noticed, you know. And you look at episodes 4, 5, and 6, they kind of did the same thing. Episode 4 was kind of the most lighthearted of the original trilogy. So, it didn't have as much darkness in it. Episode 5 was the most dark of the original trilogy, and episode 6 was more kind of neutral, you know. So, I mean, it kind of had a little bit of both. So the point is like, in my opinion, it all just the main character, the mood always ended up following the main character. I think it's too much of a coincidence to say otherwise. What did Star Trek do? Oh, well, there's this random guy who has sex with aliens, and he's the captain of a ship. Whoop-de-doo. Okay, that's it. He goes around from planet to planet to planet to planet to planet to place 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 to place, blah, 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 and always finding incessant means of violent survival every time. Gotta watch out for those Romulans.
Well, like what you were talking about with the character inconsistency, or the lack, or the different characters, different main characters for Star Wars versus Star Trek. Star Wars was able to keep those because the main story was just 6 movies. It's not that hard to do. Star Trek has had, I don't even know how many movies, 12 or 13 now.
Well, but hold on, it was 6 movies spread out across across the thing of years. It was the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy are 25 years apart.
Yeah.
So they brought back people 25 years later, and then the new Star Wars coming out. I mean, look, Luke, the guy who played Luke, that's been it's been over 30 years. He hasn't been in another Star Wars movie for over 30 years, and he's going to end up being in episode, and we do know he's going to be in episode 7, for fact. They just don't know how long he's staying, but we do know he's going to be in 7. So the overall point is that, I mean, it was over the course of multiple years. They didn't have Picard, okay, in generations, okay, and although this would be historically or story-wise inaccurate, but they didn't have him in there, then just bring out Kirk, for a movie after that had already been well over with, after Star Trek shows had been long since ended, and bring back Kirk for another movie.
Hold on one second, I'll be right back.
Is that, interestingly enough, you want to talk about Star Trek versus Star Wars, who's directing episode 7? Who's directing episode 7 is the same guy who directed Star Trek 1 and 2, the newer movies, and he even said that he likes Star Wars more than he likes Star Trek.
That's almost treason for Star Trek, honestly.
Damn straight. And also, on the Disney thing, I honestly can say I have a little bit of faith in Disney to do this. I liked the movie John Carter. That was a pretty good movie. I also had read the book Princess of Mars it was based on. But, as far as the movie goes, it was pretty good adaptation of the movie. Or a book. So basically, in my opinion, I have a little bit of faith in him, although I will admit that I am totally fucking annoyed that Lucas sold out like that. I don't think any Star Wars fan on Earth can sit there and say that did not piss them off.
Yeah, and who knows why that even happened, but that's just what happened, and well, on a final note, I think it's, like I said before, it's just down to personal preference, but it's interesting to discuss the two and compare and
fuck
contrast.
Personal preference. Star Wars is better, and guess what? Lightsaber. There we go.
Yeah.
Or no, I'm sorry, fucking lightsaber.
All right, well, on that note, we're going to go ahead and end this podcast. This has been the Grimm Times podcast with Jeff Jarman and Skylar Sylvie. Check us out on YouTube, Jeff Jarman Show, and we both have Twitter at Jeff Jarman55, at Skylar Sylvie. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Hey, go fuck yourselves.
Until they take over the world. Yeah. But it's always been a more mature subject matter as far as, like, you've got your captain who controls the ship, and you go on diplomatic missions, and you deal with different alien cultures, and you have to learn about them, and how they can affect human life and all this kind of stuff, and you have to just explore space. Pretty much, it's the ultimate dream for a lot of people is explore the universe, see what's out. The thoughts and opinions of Skylar Sylvie expressed on this show do not necessarily reflect those of the Grimm Times podcast or Jeff Jarman. Thank you and enjoy the show. All right, hello and welcome to the Grimm Times podcast. This is episode number 8. I'm your host, Jeff Jarman, along with Skylar Sylvie.
Whatever.
And we are going to be talking about Star Trek versus Star Wars today on the podcast.
Preferably, I would say Star Wars versus Star Trek. That sounds better.
Oh, it gets first billing, yeah. Out there, go on adventures, things like this.
Whereas, yeah, the only good thing that was ever in was Mass Effect.
What do you mean? Oh, as far as like the Star Trek type of scenario?
Yeah. That's it. The only thing that was ever good in was Mass Effect. So, whatever.
Well, really, that should make you like Star Trek in itself, is that having Mass Effect be so similar to that, where, you have your ship and your captain, you go on missions, and you take the ground crew out, and you explore the planet and all this stuff. Well,
yeah, of course, yeah.
Star Trek is actually a much better show, so I think it was correct in being first billed. But, it's subjective.
Oh, you're incorrect, so in your thought.
Oh, okay. Well, let's start off with, I would give a brief overview of both series, but let's face it, everybody knows already both series.
And if they don't, then they should just go away.
Yeah, they might want to skip this podcast or listen and go watch the shows themselves.
Or learn how to read the title that's going to be on this video.
Yeah. Well, I think to start with, I would just like to say that Star Trek, it's a much more grown-up show. It's much more sophisticated, in my opinion.
Right.
Yeah, I can hear you sigh already. But basically, I think my first best argument is Star Trek is not owned by Disney.
Yeah, now.
Yeah.
For the moment.
But
just wait.